that had the facts embedded within it. For a strong fact setting of the research, so I can't be I can't fall for the bluffing, but I don't really get what the difference was from the researcher's point of view in terms of strong or weak facts. If there's a weak fact, in what way does the story has to be true, surely? Is it a true story or a fake story? Because if it's a fake story, then what you're doing is you're giving people false information. So so obviously people are going to respond. If you've got fact and a story, well, assuming that the story is not fact, then it's fiction. So if you tell people, if you give them false information, how they respond is anyone's guess. So I don't really understand the point of the study, but there you go. I'm open. I have to try and find the full report. So it is in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, PSPB. I'll give that a go. Alice Rudge is a Junior Research Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies at UCL, and today publishes this article, Why We Laugh When We Know It Is Wrong. She says, for the Batak people of the Malaysian Peninsular rainforest, laughter can be dangerous. Within the system of taboos of these egalitarian hunter-gatherers, laughing in certain situations can cause storms, illness, or even death. And yet sometimes Batak people, like anyone else, laugh when they know they shouldn't. In fact, laughter can be especially pleasurable when it's forbidden. What does this paradox tell us about this seen as ethical behavior? A frog let out another crow thing. On the other hand, people will always have their own reactions to things that happen. Social contexts help shape these reactions, but aren't the only thing that determines our behavior. Laughter can erupt whether or not it is culturally or socially appropriate. When it comes to the ethics of laughter, people may recognize the rules of what's appropriate, but also take the rules into their own hands. How much freedom people have to choose what is ethical reflects their broader understandings of their relationships with others. In the Batak's egalitarian society, where no one person has systematic authority over another, individual autonomy is paramount. This focus on autonomy is why the Batak do not punish one another for inappropriate. Is, as always, Spreaker.com/user/451611. This is the English program broadcasting live on Spreaker. We're using our Spreaker Studio app, and we're now looking at the problem of facial recognition. 10 reasons why you should be worried about it. This article published today, 21st of August 2019, by Birgit Schippers, Visiting Research Fellow, Senator George J. Mitchell, Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice, Queen's University, Belfast. The writer says facial recognition technology is spreading fast. Already widespread in China, software that identifies people by comparing images of their faces against a database of records is now being adopted across much of the rest of the world. It's common among police forces, but has also been used at airports, railway stations, and shopping centres. The rapid growth of this technology has triggered a much-needed debate. Activists, politicians, academics, and even police forces are expressing serious concerns over the impact facial recognition could have on a political culture based on rights and democracy. The writer says, as someone who researches the future of human rights, I share these concerns. Here are 10 reasons why we should worry about the use of private companies. Facial recognition technology's indiscriminate and large-scale recording, storing and analyzing of our images undermines this right, because it means we can no longer do anything in public without the state knowing about it. Blanket surveillance can deter individuals from attending public events. It can stifle participation in political protests and campaigns for change, and it can discourage non-conformist behavior. This chilling effect is a serious infringement on the right to freedom of assembly, association, and expression. There is a lack of detailed and specific information as to how facial recognition is actually used. This means that we are not given the opportunity to consent to the recording, analyzing, and storing of our images in databases. By denying us the opportunity to consent, we are denied choice and control over the use of our own images. The technology promises accurate identification, but numerous studies have highlighted how the algorithms trained on racially biased data sets misidentify people of color, especially women of color. Such algorithmic bias is particularly worrying if it results in unlawful arrests or if it leads public agencies and private companies to discriminate against women and people from minority ethnic backgrounds. If the people using facial recognition software mistakenly believe that the technology is infallible, it can lead to bad decisions. Automation bias must be avoided. Machine-generated outcomes should not determine how state agencies or private corporations treat individuals. Trained human operators must exercise meaningful control and take decisions based in law. The databases that contain our facial images should ring alarm bells. They imply that private companies and law enforcement agencies are sharing our images to build watch lists of potential suspects without our knowledge or consent. This is a serious threat to our individual rights and civil liberties. The security of these databases and their vulnerability to the actions of hackers is also cause for concern. The technology can be used for blanket surveillance, but can also be deployed selectively, for example, to identify migrants and refugees. The sale of this software to agencies such as the controversial U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, which has been heavily criticized for its tactics in dealing with migrants, should worry anyone who cares for human rights. And the use of handheld mobile devices with an app by police forces raises the specter of enhanced racial profiling at street level. The academic says, with so many concerns about facial recognition technology, we desperately need a more prominent conversation on its impact on our rights and civil liberties. Without proper regulation of these systems, we risk creating dystopian police states in what were once free, democratic countries. This is the English Program. This is the English Program broadcasting live on Spreaker. I want to bring your attention to an article published on the 13th of August this year by a group of academics. Marnie Shea is Senior Lecturer and Senior Research Fellow at the School of Education and Centre for Policy Futures at the University of Queensland. Also at this university is the Queensland University of Technology, Professor in the School of Early Childhood and Inclusive Education, Annette Woods, and from the Faculty of Education at the Queensland University of Technology, Grace Sarah. And the three academics have jointly published this article on how, in relation to the Imagination Declaration, young Indigenous Australians want to be heard. But will we listen, they ask. Here's an excerpt from the Imagination Declaration, August 2019. When you think of an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander kid, or in fact any kid, imagine what's possible. Don't define us through the lens of disadvantages. Expect the best of us. The academics say a group of school students from across Australia have just shown what real leadership on Indigenous issues looks like. at last week's, this was 1 or 2 weeks ago, National Garma Festival. 65 Indigenous and non-Indigenous students from years 6 to 12, non-Indigenous Australians the same age. Yet when we searched for health or education research on identity from recent decades, we found just 14 studies that specifically included the voices of Indigenous Australians under 25. They say, we helped create spaces where Indigenous young people had a rare chance to share their hopes with their communities, schools, and each other, ranging from, I want to go to uni and study physiotherapy, to, no matter what happens, we should all be proud of whatever culture we are, no matter what culture, colour, we are all people, our skin colour shouldn't matter. The writers say, our project focused on identity, health and well-being. Young people were given resources to make a creative piece that reflects their identities in their words. Some chose to create clothes and posters with art representing their stories, with messages such as our pride, our culture, and strive with pride. In 2 urban Brisbane schools, young people wrote and recorded their own rap songs, filled with powerful lyrics such as, listen to the medley, black and deadly. Searching for acceptance, we must be respected. You can say what you want, friend or foe. I feel good in my skin wherever I go. In contrast with negative representations of Indigenous young people, the young people in our project spoke about their values such as pride, respect for elders, succeeding, family, and being a collective when they explained how they express their identities. But they also talked about the high levels of racism they experience. Navigating everyday things like going to a shop was a cause of real stress, and we're proud still need you. Why the British Army is running the same old campaign a century after World War I, and starts by saying, in a world that is unrecognisable to that of 1914, should the British Army be relying on recruitment tactics that are a century old? In 1914, the steady gaze and pointing finger of War Minister Lord Kitchener urged the men of Britain that they were all needed to protect their country. A century later, in January 2019, the British Army channeled this message once more in the latest instalment of its controversial campaign, This Is Belonging, which was duly panned for political correctness. This latest campaign implied that all were needed in uniform, but particularly targeted millennials and Generation Z, youth groups that are all too often mocked and shunned in the media. Unlike the previous Be the Best campaign, the staple for British Army recruitment for many years, and the still used Born In, made in the Royal Navy ads, the recent call for snowflakes directly engaged with negative perceptions of modern youth culture. Those considered by themselves or society as snowflakes, selfie addicts, class clowns, binge gamers, and phone zombies were told they had a place in an army that recognizes positive qualities in negative stereotypes. The writer says, but the original and the homage campaigns bear 3 core similarities. First of all, they both promote inclusivity while actually adhering to strict and specific criteria. They also target recruits from the fringes of society. And finally, both have been more infamous than successful. So both campaigns had similar issues. Neither, in fact, were particularly inclusive. Everyone was needed in 1914. Except, of course, for the thousands who failed to meet certain specific criteria, such as being over the age of 18, 19 when sent to fight, being taller than 5'3", and passing a rigorous medical exam, though the last 2 stipulations were relaxed in the final years of the war when more men were needed. A century later, inclusivity now meant reaching out to millennials for the very reasons their generation is so often disdained. So all welcome, except the 92,559 applicants in 2018 who, due to medical and fitness issues, didn't make the cut to join the 7,441 recruits who were eventually enlisted. Perhaps some of the millennial gamers it looked to attract simply did not possess the core fitness levels required by the army, suggesting the campaign was too narrow in targeting such people in the first place. After 8 consecutive years of recruitment shortage, the 2019 Snowflake campaign arrived during an era of questioning the need and purpose of the armed forces. Consistently under target strength since 2000, the rate of trained personnel had been in freefall. In early 2019, the British Armed Forces reported a deficit of 10,000, despite the requirement for personnel decreasing by 27%, down from 190,000 in 2000 to 134,304 today. The socially aware recruitment campaigns of 2018-19 sought to arrest this decline as part of a £1.6 million programme focusing on emotions, individuality and specific millennial types such as snowflakes. Promoting pastoral care, emotional and spiritual support and the chance to be an individual, the modern military appeared to offer equality in self-expression and value technological dexterity. A century after the end of World War I, the British Army was promoting inclusivity to an extent that Kitchener could never have envisaged. Unashamedly controversial, the Snowflake campaign channeled the usual youth-bashing ammunition of raging intergenerational battles. Millennials born between 1981 and 1996 and Gen Z, born from the mid-1990s onwards, are often denigrated as lacking in conviction, resilience, work ethic, common sense, or restraint. Old versus young rhetoric has encouraged media demonization of what is seen as a hypersensitive, overly indulged youth culture. In retaliation, these younger generations have criticized the economic decline and political malaise evident in British society since 2000. Recession, environmental crisis, a push towards centre-right politics, Brexit and the rise of populist world leaders have created, the writer says, an anxiety-filled future for them. But with battle lines so clearly drawn, the strength of feeling against the Snowflake campaign is unsurprising. Criticism flew from all sides, with accusations of naivety, diminishing standards and underhand recruitment tactics. Charlotte Cooper of Child Soldiers International slammed the release of the campaign during the January Blues, saying the Snowflake campaign tried to present a new side to the army, but this advertising brief shows the same old story. Young people with the fewest options being missold a one-sided view of military life as the magic ticket to a better life. The writer says an overly positive depiction of military life is a tried and tested method of army recruitment. Kitchener's increasingly desperate attempts to draw in civilians promised everything from full stomachs to sexual adventures. Again, falling standards were decried and then changed to increase recruitment numbers as Kitchener's recruits had their pride and commitment called into question. The British military has always depended on recruiting from the working class. Youth paramilitary organizations dating back to Baden-Powell's early 20th century Scout movement reflected the more accepting and benevolent attitudes to military service that was unthinkable before the Victorian period. No longer seen as rogues, soldiering could mean self-reliance, adventure, and physical fitness. In the modern forces, enlistees also have access to training, education and development, and a sense of purpose and belonging. Both campaigns enjoyed some success with this message. Poor diet can lead to blindness, by Denise Atan of the University of Bristol. This week it's been revealed that a teenager has gone blind and also lost his hearing because of a diet of chips and I think they said white bread. I didn't think white bread was that bad, but anyway, we'll have the story on that a little bit later on, and Techno Stress, how social media keeps us coming back for more even when it makes us unhappy. If you're looking for a short-term fix from the very thing that is causing you long-term problems, it's a symptom of addiction. We'll be having a look at that. The academics from Lancaster University and the University of Bamberg, as well as the Friedrich Alexander University, Erlangen, Nuremberg. We'll have a look at the. It's a co-written text from the three academics. So we'll have a look at that and other things as well throughout the day here on the English program. Feel free to get in touch. Oh, we have some Sherlock Holmes later as well. So get in touch, and if you have any comments or thoughts or whatever, feel free to pass them on. Our email is steve.rimmer@gmx.com. We've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/English program. We have a website, englishprogram.com, and a Twitter page, Steve Rimmer 17. You're listening to the English program. We're broadcasting live on Spreaker. Thanks for listening. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is in danger of becoming too male. That's according to Juan Matias Garcia, Director of Innovation Mapping at Nesta, and Joycey John, Director of Education also at Nesta. They published this article today, 14th of August. Artificial intelligence, AI systems are becoming smarter every day, beating world champions in games like Go, identifying tumors in medical scans better than human radiologists, and increasing the efficiency of electricity-hungry data centers. Some economists are comparing the transformative potential of AI with other general-purpose technologies such as the steam engine, electricity, or the transistor. The current AI systems, they say, are far from perfect. They tend to reflect the biases of the data used to train them, and to break down when they face unexpected situations. They can be gamed, as we have seen with the controversies surrounding misinformation on social media, violent content posted on YouTube, or the famous case of Tay, the Microsoft chatbot, which was manipulated into making racist and sexist statements within hours. So do we really want to turn these bias-prone, brittle technologies into the foundation stones of tomorrow's economy? One way to minimize AI risks is to increase the diversity of the teams involved in their development. As research on collective decision-making and creativity suggests, groups that are more cognitively diverse tend to make better decisions. Unfortunately, this is a far cry from the situation in the community currently developing AI systems. And the lack of gender diversity is one important, although not the only dimension of this, the writers say. A review published by the AI Now Institute earlier this year showed that less than 20% of the researchers applying to prestigious AI conferences are women, and that only a quarter of undergraduates studying AI at Stanford and the University of California at Berkeley are female. The authors argue that this lack of gender diversity results in AI failures that uniquely affect women, such as an Amazon recruitment system that was shown to discriminate against job applicants with female names. The writers say our recent report, Gender Diversity in AI Research, involved a big data analysis of 1.5 million papers in RXIV, a preprint website widely used by the AI community to disseminate its work. The writers say we analyzed the text of abstracts to determine which apply AI techniques, inferred the gender of the authors from their names, and studied the levels of gender diversity in AI and its evolution over time. We also compared the situation in different research fields and countries and differences in language between papers with female co-authors and all male papers. They say our analysis confirms the idea that there is a gender diversity crisis in AI research. Only 13.8% of AI authors in RXIV are women, and in relative terms the proportion of AI papers co-authored by at least one woman has not improved since the 1990s. There are significant differences between countries in research fields. The writers say we found a stronger representation of women in AI research in the Netherlands, Norway and Denmark, and a lower representation in Japan and Singapore. We also found that women working in physics, education, biology and social aspects of computing are more likely to publish work on AI compared with those working in computer science or mathematics. In addition to measuring gender diversity in the AI research workforce, we also explored semantic differences between research papers with and without female participation. We tested the hypothesis that research teams with more gender diversity tend to increase the variety of issues and topics which are considered in AI research, potentially making their outputs more inclusive. To do this, they say, we measured the semantic signature of each paper using a machine learning technique called word embeddings and compared these signatures between papers with at least one female author and papers without any female women authors. This analysis, which focuses on the machine learning and social aspects of computing field in the UK, showed significant differences between the groups. In particular, we found that papers, the writers say, with at least one female co-author tend to be more applied and socially aware, with terms such as fairness, human mobility, mental health, gender, and personality playing a key role. The difference between the two groups is consistent with the idea that cognitive diversity has an impact on the research produced, and suggests that it leads to increased engagement with social issues. So what explains this persistent gender gap in AI research, and what can we do about it? Research shows the lack of gender diversity in the science, technology, engineering and maths (STEM) workforce is not caused by a single factor. Gender stereotypes and discrimination, a lack of role models and mentors, insufficient attention to work-life balance, and toxic work environments in the technology industry come together to create a perfect storm against gender inclusion. There is no easy fix to close the gender gap in AI research. Secondary school students to use AI to solve social challenges and work with role models in AI. We want young people, particularly girls, to realize AI's potential for good and their role in driving change. By building skills, today I was just standing there sort of admiring my garden, and this cat just very nonchalantly, just very sort of chilled out, walked across carrying a dead rat. And it was actually one of the most shocking things I've seen for quite a while. I didn't know how to respond. What do you do when you see a stray cat carrying a dead rat in its mouth? And the image has kind of stayed with me all day. It's just an experience. How does one respond to that? How does one's brain enable an individual to move on from a complete... I was just gobsmacked. I was totally... And the other cat, because there's two of them, the other one sort of stood there looking and kind of looked at me, looked at the other cat, then looked at me as if it was saying, "Did you just see what I saw?" It was just totally revolting and shocking, and I just can't get it out of my head. So if anyone has any suggestions, love to hear from you. In the meantime, this is the English program. Let's talk about money. That always takes your mind off things. Whether they're aiming to avoid high financial management fees, control their own investments, or enjoy the thrill of playing the market, more consumers are opening investment accounts and making their own stock picks. The researchers also found that the amateur investors were actively preferring correlated assets because they seemed less complicated and more predictable. If it seems predictable, it seems safer and easier to track, says the academic, whereas if you have a combination of assets that all go in different directions, it seems chaotic, unpredictable and riskier. Ironically, when the study participants were encouraged to take more risk when creating a portfolio, the amateur investors ended up making safer, more diversified selections compared to when they were encouraged to avoid risk. This shows that amateur investors rely on a definition of risk that greatly differs from the objective definition of portfolio risk, says Jan Cornil, assistant professor at UBC Sauder and co-author of the study. This can lead them to make objectively low-risk investments when they intend to take risk, or to make high-risk investments when they intend to reduce risk. Researchers found that when amateur investors are shown the aggregate returns of portfolios, and not merely the returns of each asset composing the portfolio, they can see that having negatively correlated or uncorrelated assets is the winning investment strategy, even if it might seem counterintuitive to play both sides. In the best case scenario, you could make lots of money and have an extra vacation or buy a car or something like that. He explains of the positively correlated accounts. But if your whole portfolio crashes, you could risk losing your life savings. So the best case scenario isn't that much better, but the worst case scenario is a whole lot worse. So there you go. There's the world according to our producer. I think I can safely say that our producer likes to hedge her bets. Isn't that right, producer? Yes, who doesn't? You are listening to the English program, broadcasting live on Spreaker. The emotive warnings were made because of global reports that its precursor, Finding Nemo, had inspired a surge in purchases of clownfish, which in turn caused environmental and animal harm. What am I talking about? The Nemo effect. The Nemo effect is untrue. Animal movies promote awareness, not harm, according to researchers at the University of Oxford. This was published today. The most high profile of the warnings came from the voice of Little Dory herself, Ellen DeGeneres, and largely all the appeals focused on stopping viewers from buying pets linked with the movie. Results from scientists at Oxford, published in the journal Ambio today, show the movie series and Zootopia to spikes in demand for certain species. In both cases, separate studies found that these allegations have not been supported by the evidence. Similar allegations have been made for movies as diverse as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Jurassic Park. The scientists' research suggests there is no evidence that the Nemo effect is real. The lead researcher, Diogo Verissimo, from the Department of Zoology at Oxford, said, "We think these narratives are so compelling because they are based on a clear causal link that is plausible, relating to events that are high profile. Finding Dory was one of the highest grossing animated movies in history." The researcher says, "My research looks at demand for wildlife in multiple contexts. As such, I was intrigued as to whether the connection between these blockbusters and demand for wildlife was as straightforward as has been described in the media. My experience is that human behavior is hard to influence, particularly at scale, and it seemed unlikely that movies like Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, and the Harry Potter series indeed generated spikes in demand for the species they feature." The researcher says, "Our results suggest that the impact of movies is limited when it comes to the large-scale buying of animals. There is, however, a clear effect in terms of information seeking, which means the media does play an important role in making wildlife and nature conservation more salient. This is particularly the case for animation movies, which are viewed by a much more diverse group of people than, for example, nature documentaries." The researchers plan to follow up this study with an examination of the role of nature and wildlife documentaries in shaping behaviours towards nature. For example, the impact of the BBC Blue Planet series on behaviours around plastics, and of the documentary Blackfish on attitudes towards, oh my goodness, I can't say this. Producer, help me. Cetacean captivity. So there we go. I need to brush up on my knowledge of zoology terminology, I think. So Diogo Verissimo from Oxford collaborated on this paper with Sean Anderson and Michael Tolusti. For more information, you can go to Oxford University, and the actual publication, the Nemo Effect, Perception and Reality of Finding Nemo. Looking at the impact on marine aquarium, you can find information on that by going to researchgate.net and do a search. This is the English program. The grades need and bring an end to the clearing process, which the party says can be an incredibly stressful and worrying time for students. Of course, I'm breaking away from the text just to put this bit of information out there. It was the Labour Party that brought in tuition fees. Hashtag just saying. The writer says the problem with predicted grades. Care has to be taken to not create a crisis where there isn't one. After all, most university applicants find a place to study, and UCAS provides for adjustment, allowing students who have overachieved to reconsider where to study. But according to a 2016 report from University College London's Institute of Education, only 16% of predicted grades are accurate, and less than 1 in 5 students gains the grades their university offers are based upon. Of the others, 75% are over-predicted and 9% of students are under-predicted. These figures show that this is not a marginal issue. The process of predicted grades is inaccurate for most applicants. It would seem at first glance that the 75% of students with over-predicted grades have just been lucky. But it's not that simple, the writer says. The admissions process is designed to match academic potential, and the courses to maximize the chance of applicants thriving while studying. Of this, but emotionally, these students may not want to make a late change to their place of study, and places at their ideal universities may already be filled by students whose grades were inflated. UCL's report also noted that the students most likely to be under-predicted on grades are those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Over the course of the study, 3,000 high-performing students, those getting AABs or better from disadvantaged backgrounds, were under-predicted. This meant they applied to universities they were overqualified for. According to analysis carried out by the Department for Business Innovation and Skills, black students were the most likely to have their grades under-predicted. The Sutton Trust has also warned that poorer students are more likely to have their grades under-predicted, making them less likely to apply to the most selective institutions. All of which makes Labour's most recent suggestions of reforming the system a step in the right direction, the writer says. Indeed, a 2019 report from the University and College Union revealed that post-qualification admissions were the global norm, and that countries the UK often benchmarks against, such as Germany, Singapore, Australia and the US, all use this system. The OECD's top 5 countries with the highest performing graduates also use post-qualification admissions, so it's possible the students in those countries are being better matched to institutions and thriving accordingly. The UK's approach was designed in the 1980s and is becoming less fit for purpose. The system allows disadvantage to be compounded and the merit of a notable group of students to not be fully recognised. To move to a new system will not be easy, but international examples show this is possible. And if we are to have a system of education that values, recognises and rewards merit, it is an essential step. A system where qualifications are assessed on what has been achieved and not what has been unreliably predicted would also help to move higher education access nearer to a transparent, merit-based approach, and at the very least would remove the clairvoyance that compounds disadvantage. This is the English program broadcasting live on Spreaker. A paper published today, August 14th, in Pediatrics suggests that children and youth who do not sleep enough and use screens more than recommended are more likely to act impulsively and make poorer decisions. The findings come from the globally recognized Healthy Active Living and Obesity Research Group, HALO, and the CHEO Research Institute in Ottawa. Impulsive behavior is associated with numerous mental health and addiction problems, including eating disorders, behavioral addictions, and substance abuse, says Dr. Michelle Guerrero, lead author and postdoctoral fellow at the CHEO Research Institute and the University of Ottawa. This study shows the importance of especially paying attention to sleep and recreational screen time and reinforces the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines for children and youth. When kids follow these recommendations, they are more likely to make better decisions and act less rashly than those who do not meet the guidelines. The Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines for children and youth recommend 9 to 11 hours of sleep at night and no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time a day. The paper, 24-Hour Movement, Behaviors and Impulsivity, analyzed data for 4,524 children from the first set of data of a large longitudinal population study called the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, which will follow participants for 10 years. In addition to sleep and screen time, the ABCD study also captures data related to physical activity. Physical activity is a third pillar of the Canadian 24-Hour Movement Guidelines, which recommend at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity every day. The study allowed the researcher and her team to look at the 3 pillars of the movement guideline. I've got a media contact. People back home. Imagine if all of these things were taken away from you. I can imagine. It would be bliss. That's what we did, they say, to 24 people who volunteered for our interview-based study on what it's like to give up your smartphone and travel digital-free. With a growing concern about the negative impact digital technology can have on people's well-being, especially on holiday, we wanted to find out if a digital detox would help, but we found that disconnecting on holiday comes with emotional challenges of its own. We asked our volunteers to keep a diary of their emotions and feelings before they disconnected, during the trip, and after reconnecting when they returned home. We also conducted interviews after the digital-free journeys. Individuals who choose to disconnect on holiday tend to be looking for some therapeutic rehabilitation, but we found the digital-free journey was not always easy. Travelers experience different levels of emotions due to technology disconnection. Feelings of anxiety started to build with the anticipation of disconnecting, with worries about what would happen. One participant said, "To be honest, 2 days before the trip, I was a little bit nervous about it." The negative emotions escalated in the first few days of the disconnected holiday, with a mixture of frustration, worry, isolation, and anxiety. The feelings were especially overwhelming for some tech-savvy travelers who were used to technology in their daily lives. They struggled to settle into a new environment without their usual support of technology. One participant mentioned their anxiety around safety. "There is a chance that I might be in danger or have an accident and my family cannot reach me." Travellers at this stage were forced to travel in an old-fashioned manner, navigating using a printed map, talking to strangers, and reading printed bus timetables. 2 of our participants even gave up at this stage as they found the emotional experience unbearable, the writers say. The strength of emotions was not the same for everyone. In the research, we discovered, the writers say, several influencing factors. It was easier to disconnect in rural destinations if participants had travel companions, if they had fewer work commitments back home, if they had strong motivations for disconnecting, or if their resilience on technology in daily life was low. Reliance, I should say. Our participants overcame the initial emotions and then started to enjoy the digital-free experience. They found themselves more immersed in the destination, created more valuable moments with their travel companions, and had many more memorable and authentic encounters with locals. They felt free, happy, excited, and relieved. One participant said, "I feel quite good that I made it this far without technology. I feel quite liberated." Without the disruptions of digital technologies, they were fully engaged with their holiday experience, demonstrating that a digital-free holiday can contribute to well-being. All detoxes must come to an end, and our travellers had to face reconnecting to technology or products. Understanding what triggers consumers' negative and positive emotions can help companies improve products and marketing strategies, the writers say. Digital-free travel provides an opportunity for many travellers to re-examine their relationships with technology. Many participants reflected on their addictions and fear of missing out and considered bringing the digital-free idea into their daily life or do it more during the holidays. What are your thoughts on this? Get in touch with us here on the English program. Our Spreaker page is spreaker.com/user/451611. You can send an email with your thoughts to steve.rimmer@gmx.com. We've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/English program, and a website, English European Economic Association in Manchester this month. The co-author from Lancaster University's Department of Economics said, "While what you learn matters, how well you master what you learn is important too. Indeed, earnings differentials between degree classes are as large today as they were 20 years ago, even though 4 times more students now earn first-class degrees. The analysis points to the importance of university students' own skills as inputs into their own further intellectual development. Non-cognitive skills complement cognitive ability, as well as complementing good quality teaching." The authors pointed to important lessons for young people. Understand that your choices matter for your future. Choose to do as well as you can in school. Be mindful of your non-cognitive skills. Choose university if you think it's the right ridiculous. But that's just me. Your comments, your thoughts, your views, and your suggestions on this program are always welcome, regardless of your qualifications. Get in touch with us and tell us exactly what you think, whether you agree with me or you disagree with me. That's fine. Thank you for listening. And John is Clinical Professor of Public Health and Psychiatry at Swansea University, and at Cardiff University, Sophie Wood is Research Assistant at Cascade, and they joined forces about 2 days ago, 12th of August, and they published this article, "Social Media is Not Causing More Eating Disorders in Young People." They argue there is ongoing debate about whether eating disorders are more common in modern society. Some say that as young people are both exposed to and share images of themselves in an unprecedented way on social media today, this affects their body image and may have an impact on their eating too. Others suggest that social media can help eating disorder recovery by providing platforms for people to talk about their experiences and treatment. So, they ask, which one is correct? They say, "We know that rates of eating disorders are high. According to a large survey conducted in 2017, about 4 in every 1,000 young people aged 5 to 19 years have an eating disorder in England alone." The most recent study to look at trends in eating disorders in primary care showed that more people were being diagnosed with eating disorders year on year too. That found that the number of people being diagnosed with eating disorders increased from 32 to 37 in every 100,000 people aged 10 to 49 years between 2000 and 2009. But the GP data used in this research is now more than 10 years old, dating from before the launch of platforms such as Instagram. The writers say, "For our newly published research, we decided to look again at these trends to find if the rise of social media had changed anything. We used large primary care database covering about 7% of the population in England, and specifically looking at the anonymized records of more than 1 million children and young people who visited their GP between 2004 and 2014. They say, "We found that eating disorders recorded in primary care are nearly 11 times more common in females than males, and twice as common in people aged 16 to 20 than in the 11 to 15 or 21 to 24 age groups. They are also 1.5 times as common in people from the most affluent areas compared to the least." The most common type of eating disorder was not either of the two most well-known, anorexia and bulimia nervosa, but eating disorders not otherwise specified. This means they are eating disorders that don't quite reach the threshold to be defined as anorexia or bulimia nervosa. The writers say, "We also found that fewer young people are being diagnosed with eating disorders every year in primary care. Rates decreased most significantly for bulimia nervosa, less so for eating disorders not otherwise specified, and remained stable for anorexia nervosa. Decreases were seen in females and the 16 to 24 age group too. Significant decreases were also found in young people from the most deprived areas, but not the most affluent, where rates are higher, further widening the difference between the two groups. The numbers of males diagnosed with an eating disorder was too small for further breakdown, since less than 500 individuals were diagnosed over the 11-year study period. The number of both males and females with bulimia nervosa was particularly small too, although we did see, the writers say, a 50% decrease in females diagnosed. It's not easy, the writers say, to unpick what these findings may mean and whether social media has played a part in these changing trends. Looking at bulimia nervosa alone, some researchers suggest that bulimia nervosa is a Western phenomenon based on a pressure to be thin, while anorexia nervosa is less culture-bound and exists across time, cultures, and even species. They say that a decrease in bulimia nervosa could be attributed to the normalization of being overweight, which reduces the pressure to be thin and leads to a decrease in bulimia nervosa. In which case, it could be argued that social media is affecting the trend, although not in the way that some might assume. Rather than increasing eating disorders, the body positivity and range of body shapes and sizes seen on social media. Can I just say, we're getting a few messages saying our internet connection is a bit slow, so apologies if I'm breaking up a little bit. So rather increasing eating disorders, the body positivity and range of body shapes and sizes seen on social platforms is helping young people accept their own selves. This may also explain why the decrease is more evidence in more deprived areas where the prevalence of obesity is higher. The writers say this concept is highly contested, and it's hard to escape the rise in social media use and the increasing concerns about weight and body image. The mechanism where this might lead to eating concerns and disordered eating seems sensible, but our study doesn't currently support that. However, we did also find an increase in the number of people receiving inpatient care for eating disorders in England, which could suggest that people are being diagnosed with eating disorders at a later, more advanced stage than previously. requiring inpatient admission. Eating disorders can be problematic conditions for doctors to identify, refer, and manage for several reasons. Some studies have shown that diagnoses are less likely to be made if there are no specialist services in the area, for example. Great availability of child and adolescent mental health services and lower thresholds for acceptance of referrals than in adult services for eating disorders could explain why eating disorder diagnosis rates for 11 to 15-year-olds have remained stable over the study period, yet decreased for 16 to 24-year-olds. The writers say while more research must be done to work out whether and how social media influences the onset and continuation of eating disorders globally, studies like ours are starting to unpick assumptions we might make about the links between the two, and ultimately will help us focus on creating better prevention and online therapeutic tools for young people with eating disorders and those who may go on to develop them. If you are concerned about any of the issues mentioned in this broadcast, particularly bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa, as always, go and see your family doctor. It's very important. Just have a chat. You're listening to the English program. We are broadcasting live on Spreaker. Thanks for listening. It seems that too much inequality impedes support for public goods, according to research published in Nature by the Institute of Science and Technology in Austria. However, the researchers say while too much inequality is harmful, the researchers also find that complete equality isn't always needed either, in order to bring about the greatest benefits to the public. Some inequality within groups can actually help to ensure that everyone contributes sufficiently to the group. This is according to the findings. The results could help policymakers who are responsible for ensuring continuing support for public goods and services such as taxes, healthcare, and education. The research, including co-first authors Dr. Oliver Hauser from the University of Exeter and Dr. Christian Hilb from the IST Austria, developed a mathematical theory which took into account to what extent people with differing incomes and productivities were able to cooperate with one another by measuring their willingness to contribute part of their income to the public good. They discovered that in a very unequal society, those people with higher incomes were less inclined to contribute their proportional share towards public goods and services. This in turn also led people on the lowest incomes to contribute less. The breakdown of cooperation under high inequality has implications for funding of essential services for society. To ensure our public goods and services are maintained, we need to understand what impact inequality plays. The researchers say many people view inequality as either categorically bad or good, but our research demonstrates that it is more complicated than that. If it becomes too large, the influence over the other person is lost, and the poorer player is at the mercy of the more powerful rich player. Neither of them has much incentive to cooperate anymore, and cooperation breaks down quickly. The research was also carried out by Professor Martin Nowak of Harvard University and Professor Krishnendu Judson's PhD candidate in marketing and men's health at the University of Salford, and he's been investigating this. He says that having an eating disorder can be a lonely experience at the best of times, but imagine if, despite having a medical diagnosis, you felt you were at the back of the queue because you weren't worthy enough of help, because clinicians didn't think your case was serious enough. This is what can happen if you are one of the estimated 50% of people, of those diagnosed with an eating disorder, whose condition doesn't fall into the familiar classifications of anorexia or bulimia. Until 2013, such conditions were classified with the generic term eating disorder not otherwise specified, or EDNOS. A 2009 study found people in this category were more likely to die than those with the specific named disorders. Speaking from personal experience, the writer says, I can say that being given such a diagnosis does not make you feel good about yourself, nor does trying to explain to people how you feel when they think your problem can't be that serious because it's not anorexia or bulimia. It is an almost self-fulfilling prophecy when you think people don't take your illness seriously. You start to believe it too, and the negative emotions about yourself become more prevalent. Then the eating disorder can come back and really hit you. He says in the last few years, psychiatrists have made more effort to classify these conditions as well as providing diagnoses along more equal gender lines and relying less on body mass index. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association took the long overdue step of redefining anorexia and bulimia and creating 3 new categories of eating disorder from a previous generic other group. The first, binge eating disorder, has become better known in recent years and is thought to affect around 3 to 5% of American females and 2% of American males at some point in their lives. Sufferers lose control of what they eat and binge on large amounts of food. The severity of the disorder depends upon the number of binges per week. Unlike with bulimia, binge eating disorder patients don't purge themselves of the food through vomiting or laxative abuse. As a result, the additional calories consumed are stored by the body, and obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, and diabetes can follow. As with all eating disorders, the causes of BED are complex and differ from person to person, but generally revolve around low self-esteem, lack of control in life, loneliness, body dissatisfaction, and trauma. Help usually takes the form of psychological treatments such as therapy, as well as encouraging the patient to make changes to their life such as exercising and healthy eating. The chance of recovery is good after treatment, but, as with all eating disorders, the big issue for sufferers is in this general category. As we always say on this program, if you have any problems or worries, if you're concerned by anything that you hear in these broadcasts, you should always contact your, what we call our GP or family doctor, and have a chat. Have a one-to-one and explain your concerns and worries and ask for help. It's always important to speak to someone. It doesn't have to be a doctor. It can be a family friend, it could be a member of the family, it could be anyone. Even the postman. Just make sure that you do open up and reach out and talk to someone. You're listening to the English program, broadcasting live on Spreaker. Teresa Belton is a visiting fellow at the School of Education and Lifelong Learning at the University of East Anglia and is arguing that boredom can be good for you. The academic says being trapped in a tedious job with no possibility of escape is a recipe for real boredom. This kind of boredom is unpleasant and definitely bad for us. But a flurry of recent media interest on the subject of boredom suggests that it is a frequent experience that really bothers people and is not limited to the workplace. This must tell us something about contemporary life. She says one of the defining features of today's culture is the near ubiquity of mobile digital technology, and smartphones in particular. Look around any bus, waiting room or queue, and chances are that many of the people confined there will be head-bent, thumb tapping, I think, or scrolling down. Even at home, phones and their menus are never far from reach. To be able to be transported to any time or place, real or virtual, to access unlimited information and entertainment, or to carry out unfettered communication is an extraordinary possibility with untold positive potential. Nevertheless, increasing numbers of people now sense that constant connection is not good for them and feel the need for a digital detox. The writer says, turning to one's smartphone in order to fill or kill time is the hiatuses of life. In the hiatuses of life has become a widespread unthinking habit, an automatic response to a lull in activity. It is a distraction from the impatience of waiting for time to pass. Paradoxically, such an attempt to avoid boredom may, it seems, actually result in a kind of dissatisfaction which is itself experienced as boredom. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's, hope I've got that pronunciation right, concept of flow explains why. Flow is the satisfying feeling of complete absorption when we're wholly focused on an enjoyable, open-ended activity of which we are in control but which stretches our abilities, such as rock climbing, writing, solving an equation, or building a piece of furniture. But if our skills are greater than those needed to accomplish the activity, such as casual internet use, boredom is the result. Consequently, digital surfing can be psychologically as well as physically superficial. In our hectic lives, in which we're bombarded by attention-grabbing external stimuli, the chance instead to withdraw for a while is an important opportunity to recharge mental batteries. Moments when there seems to be nothing to do, engaging with a problematic situation until a novel solution suggests itself. Just pottering, carrying out simple tasks like washing up, deadheading garden flowers, or mending, or lying on the grass looking up at the sky can help the mind to disengage from purposeful thought and wander where it will, daydreaming, making new connections, reflecting, problem-solving. Indeed, such free-range mental activity is now understood by neuroscientists to be important. Playfulness, imagination, perseverance, and agency, out of which all sorts of fulfilling activities can emerge. A number of creative professionals have spoken of the benefit of boredom for their creativity. Novelist Neil Gaiman, for example, finds that getting really bored is the best way to come up with new ideas, and because constant social networking makes boredom impossible, he committed himself to a period offline. Millionaire businessman Felix Dennis, meanwhile, finding himself grounded in a hospital bed and bored silly without his phone, looked around for something else to do. As all he could find was a block of post-it notes on the nurse's station, and you can't write a novel or a business plan on a post-it note, he tried his hand at writing a poem. Several published volumes of poetry followed. Winnie the Pooh understood the need for a vacant mind. Poetry and hums aren't things which you get, he said, in the House of Pooh Corner. They're things that get you, and all you can do is go where they can find you. Farmers learned long ago that land which is allowed to lie fallow from time to time becomes more productive. It seems that the same can be true of the human mind. You are listening to the English program, broadcasting live on Spreaker. Brian Nolan is Professor of Social Policy and Director, Equity, Employment and Growth Research Program at the University of Oxford, and published yesterday, 13th of August, Why We Can't Just Blame Rising Inequality for the Growth of Populism Around the World. He says the idea is now commonplace that income inequality is inexorably on the rise. The US experience in particular has become central to a new grand narrative, prominent in public debate and taken to apply across rich countries. Globalization and technological change have polarized society into a small elite with highly paid, secure jobs on one side, and on the other side are growing numbers of people, including an increasingly squeezed middle class, in insecure, poorly paid work. The writer says this growing inequality is held responsible for a wide range of social and political ills. not least the erosion of solidarity, social trust and faith in democratic institutions, and politically it caused the election of Donald Trump, the UK's Brexit vote, and the broad rise of populism seen as threatening democracy. This grand narrative undoubtedly captures important aspects of the US experience, but it does not represent the whole picture, and as far as other rich countries are concerned, examining the evidence highlights the diversity of their experiences over recent decades. He says, as I've found in my research, this story is more often than not a poor fit for various countries around the world. Household surveys show that income inequality has risen significantly since the 1980s in about two-thirds of the rich countries of the OECD, leaving one-third where it has not. He has published a graph showing what has happened to the Gini coefficient, the most commonly used indicator of income inequality. He says inequality did not rise everywhere, and where it did, the scale of that increase varied widely. Countries such as the UK and Sweden did see inequality go up as sharply as the US, but for others the increase was often much more modest and even decreased for some. He says inequality rose decade by decade in the US, but the UK's increase was mostly concentrated in the Thatcher years of the 1980s, Sweden's in the 1990s, and these contained episodes rather than continuous rises are also common elsewhere. Tax data show pre-tax income shares at the very top increasing in many countries, but again, this varies widely across countries. When it comes to ordinary living standards, he says, middle-class income growth has even been more varied. The next chart, he's published a series of charts, which obviously I can't show you for obvious reason, that middle incomes have stagnated in purchasing power terms since the early 1980s in Japan and Italy, as well as the US, and grown only modestly in Germany. But these are the poorest performers. He says the UK, for example, saw substantial income growth around the middle from the late 1980s up to the mid-2000s, in sharp contrast to its lack of growth since then. Countries such as Australia, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland and Sweden also saw periods of quite strong growth. Crucially, across rich countries, the relationship between inequality and middle-income growth is weak, throwing into question the link that gets made between the so-called squeezed middle and populism. Middle incomes have generally lagged behind growth in GDP per head, but again to widely varying extents, and rising income inequality is only one factor. Knowing what happened to inequality in a given country would have been of little help in predicting whether growth in middle incomes was strong or weak. The extent to which rising inequality and stagnating living standards over decades have driven the recent rise in populism across the rich countries is also open to question. He says yes, the white working-class population, whose livelihoods have been hurt through decades of manufacturing decline, provided the core constituency supporting Trump for president. But economic dysfunction combines with cultural and demographic factors in a way that makes them very hard to disentangle. The fact that support for populist parties has risen in countries where inequality has been fairly stable over time, such as Austria and France, as well as ones where inequality has risen, and in countries where income growth has been quite robust, such as Poland, as well as ones where median incomes have stagnated, such as Hungary, illustrates the complexity of the factors at work. The evidence does suggest, he says, that economic insecurity has been a significant driver of votes for populist parties, and this may exacerbate negative attitudes toward immigration, which also play a key role in support for populist parties. But this may also reflect the continuing impact of the 2007-8 financial crisis and ensuing recession as much as longer-term trends, and is not confined to countries where inequality has risen strongly in the longer term. The US context is thus a very particular one, with only limited lessons for other rich countries. No single narrative can do justice to each one's varied experiences, and losing sight of the complexity at play is hazardous in terms of both understanding and responding to the specific challenges each one faces. Stagnating wages and rising inequality share some common roots. So some of the policies required to effectively address inequality would also boost incomes for ordinary households. But the case for tackling inequality should not be reduced to such simple terms, pushing fundamental concerns about fairness and social justice into the background. While common forces such as the advance of AI and robots will continue to play out across rich countries, as in recent decades, the way they do so will depend on the institutions in place and the policies adopted there. One-size-fits-all solutions, such as universal basic income, turn out to mean very different things depending on the structure and generosity of the welfare system that would be replaced. While there is scope to learn from experiences elsewhere, each country will have to find its own road to salvation in tackling inequality and promoting inclusive growth. Your comments, thoughts, views and suggestions are always welcome on this program. Why not get in touch and tell us exactly what you think? We do have a Twitter page for you to do so, and we also have an email. So Twitter first, Steve Rimmer17. Our email is steve.rimmer@gmx.com. We also have our main Spreaker page, spreaker.com/user/4516